Hey, my name is John Shields. Welcome to another Theory Thursday. Today, we are not looking at the theory on a piece of music, and we're not looking at music theory in a recording. Today, we are looking at the theory behind the instrument itself, the guitar. Where does it come from? How old is it? Where does the word come from? Today, we're looking at the evolution of it. We go from medieval Spain with classical guitars all the way up to electric guitars, the crazy shapes that you and I both know and love today. So today I'm wearing my gray tweed tie, and I have my Timex Weekender on with the black band. It is a little different, I swear, because the face of this one is like a paper white, whereas my olive one has like a cream colored face. So that's that. But that's what we're doing today. Happy you're here, and let's get to it. Okay, so today we're looking at a bunch of different guitars. What makes them unique, what's similar about them, and a little bit of history behind all of them. So to start off, I have a bunch of history for you, a couple dates, and it's kind of cool because the history of the guitar is controversial. I'm no expert. A lot of the experts, though, do argue about where it comes from, where the word even comes from, and what instrument is it an offshoot of, or what instruments does this offshoot to? You know, what does it inspire? So to start off, the word guitar, I have my notes over here. So if I look over here, that's what I'm doing. I'm looking at my notes. The word guitar is applied to a lot of instruments, pretty much up until 1850, which we'll talk about later when we get what we know as today's guitar. Basically, what it means is long fretted neck, flat wooden soundboard, and a flat back. That's pretty much what the word guitar meant. So that could be a lot of different instruments in history. Okay, so let's just talk about the word for a sec. The word that we use today in English, it's guitar. French and German are similar. It's guitar, just a little bit different spelling, same pronunciation. That word comes from the Spanish word guitarra, which is la guitarra. And in turn, that word came from Latin cithara with a C-I-T-H-A-R-A. And that word came from a Greek word, which also maybe came from a Persian word. What we do know is the word kithar with a K shows up in the Bible even 4 times. So, I mean, it's old. It's old. And the English translation of that word in the Bible usually comes out to harp, but that's just the translation. So we don't know exactly what instrument it's referring to, and it very well could be what we know as today. But as you look throughout history, the instruments we see, what we know of as guitar today, the most commonly accepted story is it's an offshoot of the oud, which is medieval Spain, which the oud eventually turns into the European lute. You've probably heard the word lute. Bach did a whole series on the lute. It's if you can think of mandolin, it's kind of like a mandolin. It's just a small little thing, but same principal idea. Big hollow body, fretted neck with strings running across it and frets on the neck. Okay, so and then the idea is you take the lute, and as evolution happens, eventually you get this. So that's where all the nitty gritty is, and where people can't actually decide, well, this is an offshoot of that, but that inspired that. Well, a lot of people classify lute as its whole own category, so can you even loop it in with the guitar? So that's the nuts and bolts of that. So there's a lot of offshoots. The most accepted definition is the oud to the lute to the guitar in medieval Spain. So that's a little history about the word of it and then where it came from. Now, as we know it today, 1850 in Spain is where we get the modern structure of what we think of when we think guitar. We think of something that looks like this, right? That's when this comes about, 1850. Specifically by a guy, Antonio Torres Jurado. He increased the body size and he changed the bracing pattern on the inside of the acoustic chamber, okay? And that's where we get the guitar we know today. So when I say nylon string or classical, this is probably what you're thinking of. That's when that came about, okay? And since then, it's pretty much remained unchanged since 1850. The basic design of the guitar has been around since 1850, our version of it anyway. So let's start looking at a couple of these guitars. So first up here, I have what we would generally call a classical guitar. This one in particular is actually a flamenco, which refers to a style of music, and you can faintly see an outline here. Right here, there's a little piece of plastic that's on the actual body of the guitar, and it's for fingernails. Flamenco players play very percussively, and that's what that's for. But the basic idea is still there, and I actually do have a classical guitar I'll bring out here. But as you can see, we're using nylon strings on the top three and wire strings on the bottom three. Okay, nylon is the traditional string of the guitar, the classical guitar, and even before that, they were using guts of an animal. So that's the gross history of it, but that's what they were using. Today we use nice nylon strings. You don't have to worry about getting into animal guts, but that's the story behind it. So what you'll see here is, we'll start at the top. This is what we call the headstock. There's a headstock on almost every guitar. Since we've modernized it with electrics and everything, you do see some guitars without a headstock. It just ends right here. But then where do you put all the tuners? They end up there. We won't talk about that. Headstock. This is where the tuning pegs live. This is how you control what pitch your strings are at, and you control them by tightening it or loosening it. The tighter a string is, the higher the pitch is going to go. The lower the pitch you want, the looser you want to make the string. Okay? So this is where that all lives. Now what you'll see here are geared apparatuses and strings wrapped around the actual tuning pegs. Now, this was a modern invention. Back in the day, what you would see is everything based on friction. And if you see violins even nowadays still use that, a tuning peg would be coming out this way instead of this way at a right angle. And what it would look like is a cone. It would be like a triangle, the small end going in, and as you twist it, you want to push in, and just based off the friction between the peg and the hole, you were able to keep the tightness of the string at whatever tightness you wanted. Nowadays we have gears, so we don't have to worry about pushing it in. It is a little messy to get exactly the right tones, so today we use gears, and it is a lot easier. I don't know if I'd be a guitarist back in the day if I couldn't have my geared tuners. So that's that. So that's the headstock. It houses the tuning machines. Next thing we have here is this little white piece that you see all the strings are passing through. This little white piece is called the nut. Now, this is one of the most important pieces of the guitar. Okay, why? Because all the strings run through it, and this sets the distance between each string. What it also does, which I don't think a lot of people talk about, is it determines how high off the fretboard the strings start. So if the nut was really tall, you'd have the strings coming up and then going down. You wouldn't want that at all. So the height off the fretboard is very specific, and the spaces in between the strings is very specific, and that is all set by this one little white piece. Okay, it's called the nut, N-U-T, and it's on expensive guitars it's made out of bone. Nowadays it's more than likely synthetic bone, but on the cheaper guitar it's plastic. So that's that. Okay, coming next is the neck. So what you'll see here is it's pretty much like a human anatomy. It's head, neck, this is the body. Okay, 3 main pieces. Headstock, what's next is the neck. This connects the head to the body, the neck. Now there's a couple different pieces on the neck, all very important. First, you'll see these metal bars going across the strings. Those are what we call frets, and it makes what we know as a guitar distinctively a guitar. When you look at a cello or a violin or a viola, you don't see any frets coming across the fretboard. So when you place your finger here, it's going to sound different if you move it up just a tiny bit on a violin because there's no frets. With frets on this instrument, you can put your finger anywhere within a fret, and as long as the string is making contact with that metal bar, that's the note you're going to hear. And it's not until I go over the fret that the note changes, okay? So what the frets do is gives you an exact note. Doesn't matter where your finger is within the fret, as long as this string is making contact with this bar, this fret, that's the note that's going to be played, okay? So it's just for accuracy's sake, that's what frets do. You don't need to worry about placing your hand in exact positions across the neck like you would on violin, cello, viola, anything without frets, okay? So these are usually made of nickel, copper. It's usually a bunch of metals rolled into one. The newest thing is stainless steel. So that's what's going on nowadays, which are kind of cool. But that's that, okay? That's the frets. Now, what are the frets on? This brown piece of wood is called the fretboard, okay? Now, sometimes it's part of the neck. As you can see here, it's not, because here's the neck. You can see it's one type of wood, maple. And here you see the fretboard is laid right on top of the neck, okay? You see that? You see the color difference? You have the fretboard, which is a lighter, or the neck, which is a lighter wood. It's the maple. And the fretboard, which in this case is rosewood, laid right on top of the neck. Okay. Now there's a bunch of different woods that people use for the fretboard. There are a few different tonal qualities to each fretboard, but especially as a beginner, they're so slight it doesn't really matter. Rosewood is supposed to be a darker sound. Maple is supposed to be brighter, and then there's everything in between. So that's that, and that's why they're different colors, because they're 2 different pieces of wood. Okay, and then like I said, this is the neck. The whole thing is the neck, but this is the actual wood of the neck. And typically, doesn't matter what guitar you're using, the neck is usually the same wood as the body. Okay? So that's that. We'll keep on moving. We get down to the body. All right, this is where all your sound comes from. It's the acoustic chamber. So as you probably know, this is just, there's a big hole in here, and this whole thing's hollow, and that's what happens when you strum. All that sound, the vibration of the strings, accumulates and bounces around in the acoustic chamber, and then it comes out of the hole, and that's where you get your amplification on an acoustic guitar, okay? So that's the body. The top wood people are very particular about, just like the fretboard. Different woods have different tonal qualities, okay? And that goes for the whole body. If you have to pick a wood, or you get to pick a wood, and you have a choice between picking your wood on the body, the top is particularly what we would call it, picking the body, or the wood on the top of the body, or if you had to pick the wood on your fretboard, 100% pick the wood on the body. It affects the sound much more. So, but this goes down to even the bigger area down here versus a bigger area up here. It all changes the sound, and that's the kind of cool part with the acoustic guitars. You can actually hear the physical changes. For example, this guitar is a little bit thinner this way than a typical classical guitar. Because of that, there's not as much low end as a typical classical guitar, and I'll grab one in just a sec here, just to compare it for you. So that's the body. Sound hole. Down here we have the bridge. The bridge is where the strings run through and attach to the body. That's pretty much the best way to put it. So strings make contact with the nut. They roll all the way down until you get the bridge. Now, right on the bridge, there's another white piece here, kind of like the nut. And usually they're made out of the same thing as the nut. It's called the saddle. Okay? Now, this is where it makes contact on the bridge. It's this saddle right here. So, strings are tied up on the tuning peg. They come up, they make contact with the nut, right? This is where it all starts. You can do whatever you want back here. Nothing's gonna change the sound if you touch it. But on the other side of the nut, that's where things start happening, right? So things run from the nut all the way down to the saddle. And that's your length of string, from the nut to the saddle, okay? And I think that pretty much covers the acoustic guitar. This one has some electronics in it. There's a mic that's built into it, and you can plug it in here. But for this case, we're talking about classical guitars. So this is where it all started. This is how the 1850 classical guitars are made, minus the gears in the headstock. So let me grab a different type of classical and show you that. Okay, this is my classical guitar. The other one's the flamenco, if you remember, but it's you can think of it as a classical. This one's a true classical guitar, and the difference is, first of all, you'll see a difference in the body. Let me pull this one just to see. This classical guitar is a lot thicker than the flamenco. You'll see the body shape. This one is a little bit thinner. It's brought in a little bit more. That's the neck is also a lot thicker. And then, of course, the woods, you can see, are way different. This is mahogany neck, where I'm pretty sure that's a maple, but I can't remember for sure. But the other thing about classical guitars is the necks are usually way wider than you're used to if you're used to playing a steel string or an electric. So we'll get to that too. But so this is the other classical guitar I have. As you can see, it's all the same tuning pegs. These have gears. Strings are wrapped around. You have your neck and bridge and your saddle, and everything's pretty much the same. But because of the shape of the guitar, it does produce a different sound. And this one even has a little hole in the top here. And that is what we would call a monitor for the player. Because when you're playing classical, it's like this. This is how you'd hold it. This hole pointed right at my face so I can hear exactly what I'm doing, mistakes and all, whereas the audience gets whatever comes out of the sound hole. So, just another version of the classical guitar. Next, I'm going to grab my steel string. So in the evolution of guitar, that's what comes next. We have our, debated oud, lute, and then Spain. We get the classical guitar, Spanish guitar, some people call it, which is this. And then next in the evolution is the steel string. And this is what that looks like.